be helpful. My perspective is not as long as Herb's. I've been around Laverne on and off for 34 years. And I want to say a few words about Herb. He spoke a lot about Harold Fosnot, and it's really a privilege for me today to share the podium with the three personalities you've seen on the screen and one in person, because they are people who made such a difference here. And Harold Fosnot would not have been nearly as effective if it hadn't been for two sidekicks that he had. And one of those was Herb Hogan, who built the academic side of the institution while Harold was doing a lot of things off campus to develop this university from a college to a university. And then also Oni Leonard was one of those sidekicks for a number of years. Oni Leonard was a one-person university relations office. You hear that, university relations? And he had a half-time secretary, and he did all of the fundraising with Harold Fosnot. But I remember as a student the leadership that Harold Fosnot provided, and Herb Hogan and Oni Leonard. And I want to say, Herb probably doesn't remember this. The first communication I had from Herb Hogan came at the end of my freshman year. And it was a letter from the dean suggesting that if I didn't get my academic act together, I would not be invited back to Laverne College after the next semester. I'm pleased to say that the last letters I got from Herb were reporting that I had been added to his other list, the dean's list. So I came along. I also want to say that Herb saved my bacon. I was in the last semester of my senior year. I had signed up for classes, and if you think registration is hard now, registration in those days, you had carbon copies, and you printed as hard as you could with a ball. Yes, we had ballpoint pens with a ballpoint pen, and then you turned it into the registrar's office. I might also say that the registrar's office had 2.5 people at that time. And I remember having spent time with my advisor, and I want to say my advisor is no longer here, not a member of the faculty anymore. And he had suggested that I take these courses, and if I took these courses in June, I would graduate. I looked at the catalog, and I thought, there is something wrong here. This doesn't look right. So I went back to my advisor and I said, if I look at this, it would indicate that I'm missing a course. No, Steve, you're just fine, just take these. So I had the audacity to make an appointment with the dean and vice president of the college. And I went into Herb Hogan's office and I said, Dr. Hogan, would you do me a favor and help me analyze my transcript and my registration for next semester? And Herb took one look at it and said, well, you're missing a course. You won't graduate. So Herb, you did save my bacon. I added that course and I graduated on time. And I have always appreciated that. Have always appreciated Herb's leadership. It has been extremely important. I also think for those of you who teach or have administrative positions, you probably don't know the impact you really have on a student. I never took a course from Herb. He was the dean, but what an impact he had on me. But I did take a course from Bob Neer, and I did take courses from Ahmed Isfahani. And I can say 35 years later, they made me a different person. And if I didn't have the chance to tell them that, they'd never know that. So those of you who teach every day, and those of you who are administrators, and those of you who are staff who work in offices, you don't realize sometimes what an impact you have on students and what a difference you can make in their lives by helping them through the registration process, or teaching a class, or advising them, or being there to support them in student affairs or in the residence halls. But it does make an impact. Well, in my 30-year perspective, I went back to 1970, and we had 750 students at Laverne College 30 years ago. Our budget was less than $2 million. Next year it'll be $64 million or whatever. And what still stays in my mind, and I've said this to some of you many times, we had one copy machine, and it was a wet copier. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember wet copiers, but you had two pieces. They went through this machine. They came out soaking wet. You peeled them apart, and voila, you had a copy. That was in the registrar's office, and no one else could use it. So if you were a faculty member here and you wanted to copy something, you were down in the ditto room. And you either had to type a mimeograph original, and heaven help you if you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, you started over again. Or you typed a mimeo, and you went down there and you turned, we didn't have electric motors in those days. You turned the crank, and you had the copies for your class. We made far fewer copies. We at that time, now this came not when I first started here. No computers when I started here. In fact, Virgil Wilkinson, who was the treasurer of the college, was just beginning to let people buy electric typewriters. But we had one computer terminal hidden down in a room in the basement of Founders Hall. And the only person I ever saw at that computer terminal was Ernie Eikenberry. I think he's the only one who knew how to use it. It was hooked by telephone line to a mega computer in Los Angeles that was vacuum tube and filled an entire room and took more air conditioning than we have for this entire campus. There was no internet. We, in our residence halls, which we called dormitories in those days, had vinyl records. Do any of you know what vinyl records are today? We even had 45s. A few of us had 78s, we were so old. There were no CDs. And worst of all, in our rooms, no microwaves. The microwave was something that was used for warfare at that time. Today, our enrollment has grown by more than tenfold, and we have 8,000 students. Probably something under 3,000 are on this campus in both graduate and undergraduate programs. So the majority of our students today are not on this campus, and you have the unique opportunity of going out to see where some of them do their work. At last count, I think we had 14 sites that are fairly permanent in both branch campuses and residence centers on military bases, and dozens of clusters that work throughout the state of California. Now, some of you could have gone to Athens today, but I'm using the university jet for other purposes, so we couldn't send you. But maybe another time. Athens is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It's been in business that long, and it has over 1,000 students and a full-time faculty of its own. So it now is larger than Laverne College was in 1970. Oh my. The operating budget has grown 30 times in that time. And does anyone have a clue how many copiers we have on this campus today? The last count, and I stopped counting a number of years ago, was we made more than 1 million copies per month in this institution. And computers. If we could ever get academic computing and administrative computing together, we could count the number of computers we have on this campus probably, and we would know. But the last time I looked, almost every full-time employee had a computer terminal on their desk, and we have far more computing power than that mega computer in Los Angeles ever dreamed of, and we pay about $1,200 per setup on the campus to do that. None of us dreamed 30 years ago that we'd be where we are today. In our wildest imaginations, we didn't dream that we would be where we are today. The rate of change in that 30 years is unbelievable to me. And what reminds me of that every day, I get up early, usually before the sun is up, and I go down into the kitchen, and I see all these little green lights around the kitchen. One on the microwave, one's the timer on the oven, one's on the intercom. 30 years ago, we didn't have any of those things in our kitchens. What a rate of change. Ann and I have just started grocery shopping with homegrocer.com. The biggest argument we have is, what do we order? If only we had had that while she was in school when I had to do all the shopping by myself. What a pleasure it would have been on Friday evening to sit down, Saturday morning, knock, 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 and in come the groceries. They put them on the counter for you. Ann and I are just trying to figure out who will put them away. Last week's are still sitting on the counter. Well, 30 years after my first exposure to the institution, I see the University of Laverne, as we enter, Al, either this year or next year, a new century, a new millennium, at a very interesting crossroads with a lot of very interesting challenges and opportunities. We see our law school, and Lee Newcomer told that story about how he and Paul Egley didn't get along too well. When you put those two egos in one room at the same time, you had more atomic power than any major bomb. There were two guys, there were two Steves. There was a Steve Morgan and a Steve Jones. Steve Jones was Paul Egley's assistant, and I was Lee Newcomer's assistant. We spent most of our time going back and forth translating what the other had said. I'd go to Lee and I'd say, Paul Egley says, da-da-da-da-da. And Lee'd say, you tell Paul Egley, da-da-da-da-da. I'd go back to Steve and I'd say, Steve, I think we need to do a little finessing here. If those two get together, and Steve and I still joke about that. That was a unique experience in my life. Maybe taught me something about conflict. But the law school has grown beyond our wildest expectations and now makes a move to the city of Ontario and takes us to yet another location and is moving toward ABA approval. A marvelous opportunity for the institution in a number of ways to become a part of the Inland Empire, to become the first ABA approved school in the Inland Empire, to raise the entire institution's reputation to a new level. We're coming together with our School of Education and Organizational Leadership and really focusing some attention on programs that have been of great strength to this institution for a number of years, and bringing Leonard Pellissier from the University of South Carolina to serve as the charter dean of that new School of Education at a time when education is in the spotlight in the state of California. At a time when we need 30,000 school teachers a year in the state, we can be a major player. But I look at all of our schools and colleges, and I look at the phenomenal growth that we've had in recent years, and we're landlocked. We are at capacity on this campus, and I need not tell you that. We have Pat Coleman coming on as a vice president, and we don't know where she's going to be. And we don't have a place for her. I've suggested she buy a little larger car and we could set her up, but I couldn't find a parking place for her car. So I've suggested, Pat, maybe you just be at home and we'll hang a picture in Miller Hall and in Woody Hall and remind the people who they work for. We are landlocked. We have no more capacity. No more classrooms, no more offices, no more parking places. So we need to begin to ask some questions. Do we continue to grow as an institution? And if we do, why do we grow? And what's the need for that? Well, we, like all of the other organizations built on our economic model, finance our improvement through growth. And there isn't an organization that works on the economic system of the United States that doesn't finance its improvement on growth. We need more resources in the institution. We need to continue to raise salaries. We need to continue to add people so we have the depth of educational opportunities and services that we need as an organization. We need to continue to add funding to technology. We need to do a lot of things. We need to have more resources. Some of those will come through our efforts in fundraising, but some need to come through systematic growth of the institution. So the next question is, What should grow? What pieces of the institution does it make sense for us to expand and grow and add students to? And then, obviously, a follow-up question to that is, where should we grow? There's not room here on this campus, and there's not much room adjacent to this campus. So do we take pieces of the university and put them someplace else where they can grow? Surely we can continue to develop our School of Continuing Education. We have a new center in San Luis Obispo, a relatively new center in Bakersfield, and surely that need continues, and we can grow in those locations in spite of the fact that we have no space here on our campus. Those are important questions for us as an institution, and the questions that are being addressed in a variety of forums. One of the things that I look at too is whether an 18-year-old or a 58-year-old or a 68-year-old, what kind of education will our students need to function in the next 10, 20, 40, or 50 years? I'm 30 years out, 35 years out from my undergraduate education. And 35 years ago, we would never have dreamed that I would be doing the things with technology, for instance, that I'm doing today. That the world would be, well, I would never have dreamed that the Iron Curtain would have dropped, that the Berlin Wall would have been torn down, that the world would be organized the way it is today, and that we would be able to communicate the way we do today, and that I could access the kind of information I can as quickly as I can and in the quantities that we can today. So certainly technology is a piece of the puzzle for the future. How do we train people, educate people to use that technology effectively? Not to be used by it, but to use it. Diversity is an issue that certainly is going to continue to be important as we educate people to work in the world of the future. And that's an issue that I'm proud of the way we have addressed on this campus. We need to continue to address it. 30 years ago, we had diversity on this campus. More diversity than many schools did, and we always have. But that's an issue for our students. The knowledge explosion. How do people handle the amount of knowledge that's available to us? We used to have a periodic table hanging in this room, and maybe it's behind the curtains. Do you know how much that periodic table has changed since I took chemistry here in the mid-1960s? It's changed dramatically. Do you know how different the library is today? Did any of you have to use the Reader's Guide to Periodicals to find magazine articles? Did you actually have to do that with hard copy paper? Now you go in and you can type one word, and I'm amazed at what comes up, and I can walk up and down the shelves, not only of this library, but a lot of other libraries as well. How do we train people, educate people, to access the knowledge, to sort through the knowledge that's useful to them, and to utilize that knowledge when there's so much more? It used to be that I actually thought a faculty member could stand before a class that I was in, and they could relay the knowledge to me about that discipline. It's impossible today. It can just touch the tip of the iceberg. How does that change the way we provide education on our campus? Training people and educating people just to deal with the rate of change is something new. And if we've changed as much as we have in the last 30 years, what will that be like in the next 30 years if in fact it's growing exponentially, which it appears to have done if you look back 100 years or 150 years? ULV needs to enter into a period of intensive planning. And we need to determine as a university, who do we want to be 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? What programs and services do we want to offer? Where do we want to offer those programs and services? To whom do we want to offer programs and services? How do we offer those? new modalities of delivery through technology and who knows what in the next 10 or 20 years. And what level of quality for both our academic programs and services do we want to provide for our students? We are in a period of planning. It has begun. The University Council has just taken on a number of important topics, and they have formed a series of committees that will start to work to address some of those issues. The senior management team has started looking at a variety of issues and will work to gather data and involve others in the community in our discussions and deliberations, hoping to bring forth some recommendations and ideas and proposals in the early fall for the university community to consider about our future. The total community needs to be involved in this process. And in a sense, we're forced into it by the fact that we have reached a stopping place here on this campus, and we need to chart the course for where we go. But what an appropriate time, nearly the beginning of the new century and the new millennium. Having come off a period of rapid growth, it's a good time to take that step back and to look at where we want to go. The dreams I have for what we do as an institution, no matter what a person's age, or the degree they're seeking, or the location they're seeking that degree, is I think we need to continue to concentrate heavily on teaching our students at every level to communicate effectively. As I talk to leaders in industry after industry, they're saying to me that a primary need for the people they hire is to be able to communicate, to be able to access information, to be able to write well, and to be able to speak well, both with one person at a time and with groups of people. We also need to make sure that all of our students, in spite of what technology is doing in some of our jobs, know how to work in groups. Because every major industry in the country uses groups to identify and solve problems. Not people in lone offices or lone rooms somewhere, but in groups working with other people. So it's extremely important that we provide opportunities for our students to work in groups, to think critically, to think first, what are the questions that we need to ask? Secondly, where do we find the answers? And then how do we choose the right answers? Thinking critically, critical thinking needs to be woven throughout our curriculum. We need to continue to teach our students to understand and appreciate diversity, because in the next 10, 20, 40, 50 years, they're going to be working in an increasingly diverse environment, and they need to know how to do that. To develop their values and their integrity. I continue to believe that that is one of the most important foundation blocks of the institution. And no matter how large or small we are, if it isn't an important piece of all of the curriculum across the spectrum, we're going to miss a grand opportunity to help perpetuate the values and integrity that will be important as the population continues to grow and become more dense, as the world continues to become smaller, and as we continue to communicate more rapidly than we do. To access and use knowledge, I've talked about. People need to be educated to learn how to access knowledge, to utilize that knowledge. And my final piece of what I dream about for an education for any student in any discipline is to understand the linkage between the disciplines. None of us lead a life in compartments by discipline. We lead interdisciplinary lives, and we need to understand how the disciplines interact with each other and link to each other to make a whole person, to create an entire society. On the service side, I'd like to see us look at how we can continue to make it easier and easier for a student to go through registration processes and the bureaucracy that is necessary to help keep track of our students. But we need to make that an easy process. I've said it before, I would say it again. I want the challenge for our students to be in the classroom, not in the registration process. So we need to continue to work on that. We need to become more streamlined. We need to look at every step that we ask a student to go through and say, is that necessary? Could we consolidate 5 of these steps into one and make it that much faster and easier for a student to go through the process? Why do we want to do all this? Why do we want to plan? Why do we want to think about the future? Because we, as an institution, make an enormous difference in this world that we're a part of. We enable people to pursue their dreams, whether it's an 18-year-old or a 65-year-old or a 75-year-old. You need only come to commencement and watch the students cross the platform and look at the diversity of faces and people and realize what we've done for them. We've enabled them. And Richard Gelm used that the other day, a statement that we empower our students. We empower our students to take the next step, to do what they want to do with their lives. We empower people to make things happen in their lives and in the lives of other people. I also believe that an institution such as Verne helps level the playing field. In this tremendously diverse society, there is no more effective vehicle for leveling the playing field than higher education, than the education and the degrees that the people earn at the University of Verne. We have 40,000 plus graduates around the world. Last time I looked in the alumni directory, they are in every state and 56 foreign countries. What an impact a little place like this has when you think of district superintendents, when you think of school teachers, when you think of workers throughout the corporate community. The impact we have as an institution, it's a snowball effect, and it's a big snowball that makes a big difference. It's a noble cause, an important, worthwhile mission. We can chart the course for the next century, so 50 years from now or 100 years from now, when people talk about what it was like in 2000, they will have said those people put another foundation block in the history of the university. Thanks.